Hello and welcome back to the Finding Hope with Overcoming MS webinar series, season 4. We're so pleased to bring you tonight's session with Sam Josephs, who's a qualified nutritional therapist and an Overcoming MS Facilitator. My name is Karen Lee and I'm one of the co-hosts for tonight, and I'm joining you from beautiful Devon in the UK. In a moment, I'll be inviting Sam and my co-host for the evening, Kim, to the stage. But before I do, I just want to run through a little bit of housekeeping just to keep the webinar running as smoothly as possible for you. So welcome to all of you watching this on replay in the future. But if you're joining us live, please do note that this session is being recorded and you'll receive a link to access the recording in the next week or so. You'll also notice that this Zoom webinar, there is no video or audio component for participants. So, however, it is still an interactive session. And if you want to, and we would like you to, submit questions, you can do that with the Q&A tab, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. We're going to start with some pre-submitted questions to go through, so you'll have time to think up what you want to ask and pop them in the Q&A. If you have any technical glitches, which, we know these things do happen, try leaving the webinar and then re-entering again using the link on your email. And we recommend that you use Chrome to get the best results to access this webinar. We've tried to make these sessions even more accessible, and today we're using the closed captioning service, which looks like subtitles at the bottom of your screen. So you can either turn these off or on by clicking on that CC or the CC button that says Show Captions, and you can either select Show Subtitles or hide Subtitles. At the end of the webinar, there is a short survey that will pop up. Please don't try and skip it. Do just quickly fill it in. It won't take very long. It's really important that we get your feedback to make sure that these webinars are meeting your needs and the fact that you enjoy them. So just a couple of moments to fill that in before you go. This session tonight is going to run for about an hour and 15 minutes. Just in case you need to plan for anything else. And so now, without any further ado, I would like to welcome Sam and Kim to the stage. There we go. Here's Kim and Sam.
Everybody.
Hi. Shall we just introduce ourselves for people who don't know us before Sam gets stuck into the questions?
Good idea. Yes.
Do you want to go first, Kim?
Okay, yes. So my name's Kim, and I live in West Sussex, a little town called Loxwood, with my husband and my 2 teenagers. And I've had MS for about almost 14 years. So I feel like I'm kind of old hat, and kind of I've been on this journey for a while. And yeah, so I ran a blog called MS Diet for Life for a while, and I'm just really passionate about how we can manage our MS through diet and lifestyle. Yes, that's me.
Great.
Go for it.
And yes, Sam.
Yes, hello, thank you, and good evening. For those that don't know me, my name is Sam Josephs. I'm a registered nutritional therapist, and I'm working with Overcoming MS as a senior facilitator. My husband, Danny, was diagnosed with MS in 2002. So I don't have MS myself, but I've been living with the condition for over 20 years. And I would say most people in my private one-to-one practice in North London are people who have MS. I also lecture and teach MS modules to upcoming nutritional therapists. I do workshops in various other topics. And I'm just delighted to have been facilitating a retreat a couple of weeks ago with Overcoming MS, which was super, super rewarding and yeah, a hugely fun and what's the word? Deep and meaningful weekend, I think. Yeah.
Great. And well, so for me, I'm a retired intensive care nurse. I gave up when I got my MS diagnosis. I started OMS the day after I got my diagnosis, because I was already aware of it through a friend of mine, because I was also already sharing my passion for eating a whole food plant-based diet. So I have an alter ego called the Sensitive Foodie, and I blog and create tasty recipes because I just love eating. And I'm an author as well, and an OMS ambassador. Funnily enough, a co-ambassador for the Sussex Circle, even though I've now moved down to Devon. But I'm still involved in that circle as well. So great. So shall we get started? Are you ready, Sam?
Yep.
Fab. Okay, so the first one is a really interesting question, actually. This person says, I'm sensitive to foundational foods like flaxseed oil and like to know if there are alternative options. Hemp seed oil has got a different omega profile. What would be the recommended daily intake to align with overcoming MS?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So I'm not sure what is meant by foundational foods, but yes, I think we're talking about the omega, the high intake of polyunsaturated fatty acids. So that's the 20 to 40 mils of flaxseed oil, as well as, if not on a completely vegan approach, 3 portions of oily fish. And I would say if you are getting oily fish 3 times a week on the diet, then that's a really good start in terms of getting good levels of omega-3. Without flax oil, you might want to think about other foods that are high in omega-3, walnuts, including a portion of walnuts in your daily diet. Chia seeds as well can be sprinkled into porridge in the mornings and included in the diet daily. The hemp oil question is an interesting one because the amount of omega-3 in hemp oil is about half that of what's in flaxseed oil. So in order to match it like for like, you would have to double the amount of hemp oil to get the same omega-3. But in doing so, you'd also be increasing the amount of omega-6 that you would be consuming. So I'm not sure that I would substitute like for like. I think it's a great oil to be using in salads and cold food preparations and drizzling and things. And certainly a really nice alternative to extra virgin olive oil, which is much higher in the monounsaturated fat. So I would say definitely there's a place to include it in the diet, but I don't think I would recommend taking it in the sort of supplemental levels of the flaxseed oil. It might be worth looking at algal oil. So that's a supplement that is the plant-based supplement taken from algae from the sea, high in the EPA, DHA, omega-3 oils, and maybe just doubling up on a supplement of algal oil.
Great. I was going to ask about the algae oil, actually. Is that as an alternative? So yeah, great. Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you very much. The next question we've got is this person would like some advice on how to stick to good habits. So like tricks of not falling into comfort eating, which isn't tends to be non-OMS or overcoming MS compliant foods. Especially with fatigue and low mood that people with MS get. So
yeah,
advice on that.
So it's all about making good habits. And I think also if you are someone who knows that there are times in the day when fatigue might be a problem and you might be reaching for snacks or unhealthier food options, try and preempt that. Either having a snack earlier. So, for example, if you know that 3 to 4 o'clock is a real weak spot for you in the afternoon, can you have a snack at 2 o'clock, something like a banana and a handful of almonds, something that's very easy and portable if you're not at home or around the kitchen, to just ride you through that time of day when you know you're more likely to slip into bad habits. I also think maybe not having food in easy reach that might cause you to slip. So be careful of what is in your cupboards and in your fridge, and thinking around that kind of thing. I think meal planning is a good one as well. And yeah, like batch cooking, so that you make sure that if you are tired in the evening, you've got a soup, for example, that you froze earlier in the week that can be easily defrosted on the hob, rather than reaching for a sort of a ready meal as you pass Sainsbury's on the way home from work or something like that. What do you think, sensitive foodie?
Yeah, well, yeah, all really good top tips, and I think it can be challenging when you've got the if you've got kids and you've got the kids snacks and things like that. So that can be a little bit of a problem. So trying to keep you away from those, and making sure that you've got your own snacks lined up, I think is quite handy. It can be quite hard, can't it, to have that discipline. But yeah, all of those things, I always find that having lots of fruit in the house, hummus, rice cakes, also, as well as having small portions left over in the freezer, if you've got a real craving, if you've made, I don't know, some like sweet potato chocolate brownies or something that's quite healthy, if you've got leftover, have them in the freezer as well, or even the little energy balls, and then you can dip into them rather than going and face planting the biscuit tin. Yeah,
absolutely. And also I would add encouraging your kids to enjoy the same kind of snacks, again, to limit what is in the house.
Indeed.
Yeah, getting the kids on the dried fruit and nuts and kinds of snacks.
Exactly. If you can't see it, then you won't crave it as much. So it's good. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Right. Last question I'm going to ask at this moment is about limitation in the Overcoming MS diet of certain higher fat foods that are healthy, like olives and avocados and nuts. These are the type of things that encourage in other MS focused diets. So given that they're beneficial to people who've got MS, do you think the amounts should be reconsidered, or what's the thinking behind this limitation of higher fat things like avocados, and even though they're delicious?
Yeah, the Overcoming MS program recommends foods like nuts and seeds and avocado, and some of those higher fat foods are consumed in moderation. And the reason for that is because no single food is a single source of fat. And although these foods are predominantly the monounsaturated fats that don't affect the immune system in a positive or negative way, and can be very useful as an energy source and an anti-degenerative protective fat, they will also contain a source of saturated fat. And the limit, I don't feel that the limit, I think the suggestion is that these foods are consumed in moderation, and that means really in line with national recommendations. So I think national recommendations for a serving size of avocado is about 1/3 of an avocado. And I would say that it would be absolutely fine on the Overcoming MS program to have a half an avocado a day. You wouldn't be going over your saturated fat limits. Similarly, a recommended portion of nuts is around 30 grams a day, but it can be helpful, and depending as well on other foods and food sources, in your diet, for example, if you're completely plant-based and not including oily fish, that would be absolutely fine to increase that to 50 or even 80 grams of nuts as well. So I don't feel that there's a limitation as such around those higher fat foods. I feel that it's asking us to be mindful about including foods generally that are higher in calories and potentially do contain a source of saturated fat in moderation, but that moderation is completely in line with national recommendations as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Sam a couple of questions now. The first one is it okay for people following the Overcoming MS diet to eat Heinz baked beans or similar? I've checked the ingredients and can't find anything contrary to the diet. Okay, that's the first part of the question. And then the second part is also, if you scrape the batter off battered fish, you know, the fish that you get with fish and chips, is the fish then okay to eat, or is it still not good for someone with MS to eat? So yes, let's tackle the baked beans first. What do you think, Sam?
So baked beans, yeah, absolutely. You're right, there's nothing in baked beans that is contraindicated on the Overcoming MS diet. And whilst they do contain added sugar, and they may not be as healthful as your own homemade baked beans, which you would have much lower sugar, and possibly even throwing in some fresh herbs, some extra garlic, some sauteed onions. They're absolutely fine to include on the Overcoming MS diet, exactly when you say, you know, you might be feeling fatigued, and, you know, if you're going to reach for a food that's quick and easy and very cheap, then Heinz baked beans are totally acceptable. The fish question is a very interesting question, and I have to say that I have been in that situation with my husband, who's from Newcastle, and we have been up touring in Northumberland, where there's pretty much nothing else to eat apart from fish and chips all day long. And that is exactly what he did. He had the fish, but he took the batter away, and inside you've got lovely steamed white fish. If it's cooked well, at the right temperature, it's likely that the fish itself won't have absorbed any of the oil. I don't know if I can say any of the oil, but a significant amount of the oil. And whilst I'm not advising everyone to go out and eat deep fried fish and remove the batter by any stretch, I do think that in case of emergency, as we like to call it, when, you know, it's that or go hungry, I think that actually, you know, of course it's better to have grilled fish where possible, but if you find yourself in that sticky situation, you're probably fine. The fish has been cooked with the steam action from the fish's own moisture rather than absorbing any of the oil. So reluctantly, I will say yes, but please don't go around telling everyone that you can eat deep fried fish as long as you remove the batter. That's not what I'm saying. And I hope
only in emergencies. Yeah, only in emergency situations. Yeah, that's great. Okay, the next question. How do you gain weight or keep from losing weight on the Overcoming MS? Are vegan protein shakes okay? Ooh, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, so and sometimes I find that people can put on weight, and I find that people can lose weight. And if you're losing weight and you don't want to be losing weight, it might be that you're shifting to a reasonably low calorie diet. Once you take out the saturated fat, you are actually removing, you know, quite a big calorie source in the diet. And we need to remember that plant-based foods are much less calorie dense than the animal-based foods. You know, there's much less calories in a bean chili than there is in a meat chili, for example. So having bigger portions is one way to ensure that you don't lose weight. Also introducing snacks, and maybe calorie dense snacks, like we mentioned before, a handful of nuts and a piece of fresh fruit, mashed avocado with rice cakes. Introducing snacks between meals as well is another good way to sort of protect against losing calories. And I would say that vegan protein shakes, so that's a protein shake. So normally a protein shake will be a whey powder, which is actually from dairy. So a vegan protein shake will come from soy or from hemp or from pea protein. And you're looking for one that's not too heavily processed and one that doesn't have added sugars. And then that would be absolutely fine. You can stir a spoonful into porridge, you can make smoothies out of it, and that would be a way, again, to boost protein. But don't forget that this is a low saturated fat diet, and the polyunsaturates are really important. So it shouldn't be that you're on a very low fat diet. So drizzling on the flaxseed oil, making sure you're getting that 20 to 40 milliliters, maybe having some nut butter on some of the rice cakes, and like I said, the avocado, making sure that the fat is still there. What do you think, Kim?
Yes, I was just about to actually say nut butters are fantastic because they're so delicious and they're wonderful as spreads. And there are quite a few good ones: almond, cashew. There are quite a few other good ones. And I suppose you just need to make sure that you get the ones that are good, the ones that don't have the bad oils in them. The palm oil, not a great fan of palm oil. I prefer something without palm oil because and so brilliant idea.
And you can stir it into your porridge as well. You don't have to, I mean, use it in ingredients. Yeah,
exactly. Or throw it into a smoothie even. And so nut butters or nuts, I think that's a wonderful way to get the calories in. Okay, moving on to the next question. This person says, I'm obviously not eating cheese and have found Applewood vegan cheese to be a nice alternative. I noticed that the ingredients include coconut oil. Should I be avoiding this completely?
Yes. Yes, you should. Coconut oil is saturated fat. So please, yes, I'm afraid, if you can. I mean, you can do what you want, but we recommend, because it's a source of saturated fat, that you do avoid it. Nush make a really nice cream cheese, which is great, again, on rice crackers, lovely with smoked salmon or with vegetable slices. Do you guys have any recommendation for the cheese fix?
There's a I can never remember what it's called. There's a cashew nut cheese, which is just cashew nuts, which is more of a, it's been dehydrated more, so it's more of a solid one. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what it's called.
Does it come in a sort of hexagon sort of box?
Yeah.
Right. It costs about 10. I mean, it's extremely expensive.
It's for special occasions only. But that's
I was going to say, but you can make your own cashew cheese.
You can.
So what I do is I just blitz up a handful of cashews with some water, maybe a bit of garlic, some salt and some nutritional yeast, and it becomes super cheesy. It's so yummy. You've just got to get the quantities right, play with the quantities so it's not too runny, but that makes a really yummy cheese alternative.
Yeah, great. There you go. Ditch the coconut oil.
Yeah. And well, and it's also, they have other rubbish in it as well, generally. So
yeah.
Okay, right. So the next question is, does it matter that old cast iron ovens will be patternized with food over time? So I think this is like, the cooking dishes. So, and often that's going to be saturated fat embedded in the pan. I understand food may not be in direct contact with the sides or the bottom of the oven. Oh, right. Oh, it's in the oven, not in a pan. But the food will be in that atmosphere. Does that matter?
No. If you're
No.
not consuming the saturated fat, that's absolutely fine.
Mm. Okay, right. Next question, and I'm sure this is one that everybody's will ask at some point. Can you suggest how to avoid the effects of a high fiber diet causing extreme flatulence?
Right. Yeah. So what happens when you're eating a high fiber diet is you're feeding your beneficial bacteria, because that's what they love and that's what they're living on. And as they're eating it, and it's actually fermenting in your tummy, in your intestines, it generates bloating and gas. And that's the sort of the activity of the microbes. One of the ways around that is to introduce fiber much more slowly into the diet. So maybe not going full high fiber overnight, maybe looking at breads, for example, that are 50-50, or maybe not having, every week the whole grain, and switching it up bit by bit, mixing brown rice and white rice, for example, to slightly reduce the fiber at first. What happens as you continue, and there was an interesting study, actually, they actually did a study looking at when people increased the fiber with beans and pulses, particularly, which seemed to be one of the main offenders. And that's because it's a soluble fiber, which is the type of fiber that is more likely to cause wind. And they looked at a bunch of people who had increased fiber. They asked them to increase the fiber over 12 weeks. And lots of people really suffered with wind, particularly in the beginning. But by the 8th week, there was almost no complaints at all. So what happens slowly over a period of time is that your microbiome, that's the population of good and bad bacteria that live in the intestines, get used to the levels of fiber, and you start to kind of increase the right types of bacteria that are going to manage that amount of fiber that you're consuming. So you can stick with it if the diet is giving you lots of flatulence. You can stick with it, but if people around you are finding it all rather unsociable, then I would say maybe pull it back a little bit. Things like cabbage and broccoli are particularly maybe flatulent. Think about different green leaves and lettuces instead, and maybe little by little introduce fiber slowly. What do you think, Karen?
Yeah, I agree. I think also it depends where your starting point is, because I think because we know that there's this connection between gut health and MS, a bit of leaky gut and everything. I think if your gut's not in a particularly happy place, it reacts really quickly to these things, and I mean, I found once I ditched dairy, actually it was way better, even before introducing all of the other things. So I think it's kind of like what your starting point is. But yeah, just treading really carefully. Eating fruit separately or first is also quite helpful, because you've got the sugars in fruit. If they're being held up by a heavy meal as you're being digested, that can create quite a bit extra bubbles going on. So I think eating fruit either first or as a snack rather than as a pudding, that can be quite helpful, because then sugar even more so kind of sets the bacteria off as well. And they're having a party with the fiber and the sugar, and it's just like, whoa, here we go. So but yeah, they're good. And also just making sure that everything, especially like with pulses, is just making that they're properly soaked or properly cooked, or when you're having tin, to make sure that you rinse it really well. And so those things I think can help. But just take your time, and yeah, just bear with.
I think also there's the possibility that if you're soaking and then cooking your own beans, it might be less impactful from a flatulence point of view. than using canned varieties. And if you're really desperate, there is a supplement available in the UK called Bean Assist, which contains the enzyme that breaks down the sugar or the starchy component of beans and lentils. So it might be worth having a look at that. It's called Bean Assist. Yeah.
Great. Good. Thank you. Next one is, should you adapt the Overcoming MS diet if you have osteoporosis? And if so, how?
No, I wouldn't hugely adapt the diet at all. The Overcoming MS diet is a modified Mediterranean diet. The best diet for osteoporosis is the Mediterranean diet. So I absolutely would say that the diet is nourishing your osteoporosis already, being extremely high in its nutrient content and low in all the inflammatory factors as well. Omega-3 is really good for osteoporosis. You can pay special attention to foods that are rich in calcium, like the dark green leafy veg, the nuts, tahini. Make sure that your tofu, for example, is a calcium set tofu. So cauldron is a good one. But no, I wouldn't. Prunes, maybe, including prunes. There was a study that showed 8 prunes a day can be very beneficial to protect against bone loss. And this may be due to the effects that it has on the bacteria in the gut, but it's also, prunes are also a really good source of a mineral called boron, which is really helpful for bones. So I would say no need to adapt the program, but you can pay special attention to the calcium-rich foods.
Fantastic. Maybe when the flatulence has died down before you have 8 prunes. Great. Over to you, Kim.
Okay, brilliant. So is it safe to eat sheep milk cheese in light of recent research that it does not have the same inflammatory effect as cow's milk? What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, so this was a study that was done, I think it was just published this year, where they've seen that there is an immune reaction that is overexpressed in people with MS to cows and goats' casein, which is one of the proteins in milk, but there seemed to be less reaction from the casein from the sheep's milk. So that might be something like feta, I suppose, or cheese like feta. The answer from an Overcoming MS perspective is no. It's still not okay to consume sheep's milk. Sheep's milk still contains another protein called butyrylfolin. And we know that butyrylfolin is structurally very similar to some of the myelin proteins and may be causing this process of molecular mimicry, whereby the body's immune cells, when they're exposed to the milk, whether it's sheep, goat, or cow, turns in on itself and begins to attack myelin. So until the research tells us something different, then no, sheep's milk is not recommended.
Okay. Next question. I would like your guidance on whether eating legumes and gluten could lead to a leaky gut.
Okay, so this question is really around the idea. So gluten can be quite irritating to the gut. And there is some research around gluten and autoimmune conditions. And then legumes are a source of lectins. So lectins are a protein that is contained in all plants, but in quite high amounts in legumes and kidney beans. If, for example, you don't cook kidney beans properly, the lectins or the toxin that's in the kidney beans can actually be quite powerful in terms of causing reactions and symptoms. But when you cook when you cook legumes and beans, you are destroying a lot of the lectins. And whilst I don't think that they are responsible for causing a leaky gut, there is some discussion around whether they may aggravate the presence of a leaky gut. But I think one of the one of the wonderful things about a whole food plant-based diet is you are providing your gut with everything that it needs to promote healing and protect against leakiness. And I'm not sure that there's any evidence as yet that is convincing, particularly in human trials and human studies, that there's any connection between foods that are rich in lectins, namely the beans and the lentils are the ones that get a bad rap for being high in lectins, but most of the lectins are destroyed in the cooking process. We're rarely eating raw beans and legumes, and so they are completely safe.
Okay, fabulous. Thanks, Sam. The next question: would you recommend taking food which supports the immune? Sorry, would you recommend taking food which supports the immune system? For example, certain mushrooms and fermented food, as opposed to immune boosting supplements such as echinacea for colds. Okay, so food as opposed to immune boosting foods as opposed to immune boosting supplements.
Yeah, 100%. Supplements are really there just to supplement or fill in the gaps. If you're on the Overcoming MS diet, you will be on an extremely immune supportive approach. The whole modified Mediterranean approach is based around supporting the immune system. So absolutely, including lots of immune boosting foods, lots of colors, like you say, mushrooms, lots of high fiber foods that nourish the healthy bacteria can be much more beneficial. And the way the body uses and metabolizes whole foods is very different to how it is when we give it a supplement that might be one nutrient that's been extracted and it's not there in its whole form. And echinacea, I think we have to be a little bit cautious around things like echinacea, which boost the immune system. So if you've got an autoimmune condition, there is some thought around boosting the immune system not being something that we want to go ahead and do, because it may boost MS activity. So absolutely, food over supplements.
Great. I'll just ask you two more questions from the ones that have been sent in, and then we'll go to the live questions. Okay. So this is a quick one for you. Are naked bars and they're like an acceptable snack?
Yes.
Lovely.
Naked bars are great. Naked bars are great. Number of ingredients, very small. If you're looking for a healthy nut-based bar, then just stay away from too many added sugars, stay away from the chocolate chips, and try and avoid the ones with peanuts. But otherwise, yeah, 100%.
They've also started doing granola as well. They do the blueberry granola. Yeah. So there's no oil in it. So
yeah.
And last on this section, when increasing the speed or intensity of daily exercise, is there an easy way to work out how much more food we need to eat so as not to become calorie deficient?
By calorie deficient, I imagine the person is saying so that they're not going to be losing weight. They'll be meeting their calorific needs. Apps. There are some fantastic apps. I think there's one called Future. There's one called MyFitnessPal. Ladies, do you use any apps like these?
Yeah, I've used MyFitnessPal actually for the other reason, to lose weight, because I was overeating. But when I increased my exercise, I found that really useful, because suddenly I could eat more again, because I just needed to make some shifts. But I found that really interesting from a geeky side as well. That was really helpful. But I guess the other thing is you just eat more. If you're hungry, then eat.
Yeah, and the other thing with exercise is if you are doing a hardcore workout, you have a very narrow window after that period of exercise when you can carb load. So you could have something like a tablespoon of honey, and that glucose goes immediately to the stores in the muscle to replenish the energy there. And that can also help in terms of boosting your calorific needs. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Kim, have you managed to have a look at the other ones coming in?
Yeah, so let's start with the first one that came in earlier. Can I eat sunflower seeds?
Yes. Yes. So when we eat sunflower seeds, we're eating the whole seed, as opposed to drinking spoonfuls of sunflower oil, which would be very high in omega-6. But the whole seed, you have to consume an awful lot of it to get sort of huge amounts of omega-6. So that's absolutely fine. And sunflower seeds are packed with minerals and vitamins as well. So definitely.
Okay, fabulous. And then Rachel says, I've heard that a low carb, high fat diet is good for reducing inflammation, so helps with MS. The total polar opposite of veganism. What's best?
So I think Rachel's talking about the ketogenic diet, which is very difficult to do with a plant-based approach. Not impossible. And there is some interesting evidence and studies around the ketogenic diet, which is a very high fat diet, very low carb diet, medium amounts of protein. It's a diet that was originally developed for epilepsy, and it helps to calm inflammation in the brain. However, it is not a diet that is easy to follow. You have to regularly measure your ketones in your urine, which is the breakdown product of burning fat, and it's a different fuel source from glucose. And also following it long term can lead to various nutritional deficiencies. It increases your chance of anemia. It can be very taxing on kidneys, and it can have quite detrimental effects on the microbiome. As you can imagine, you are reducing a lot of the high fiber foods as well. So it isn't something that is sustainable long term, like the Overcoming MS approach.
And then Louis says, please can I ask if a little rapeseed oil in a pre-prepared sauce is okay?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay.
I would say yes.
Great.
As long as it's not the main ingredient. Yeah. I'm thinking of like a tomato. I'm thinking of a quick, cheap evening meal with a ready-made tomato-based sauce to go with the pasta or something, and a little bit of rapeseed oil. Absolutely fine. Yeah.
Great. Over to you, Karen.
Great, thank you. It's so interesting, these questions, aren't they? So Jane has said, she says, I've been following the OMS diet recommendations for many years, but she's currently doing Zoe personalized nutrition, where they seem to recommend including more protein, fat, and fiber to minimize blood sugar spikes. Have you come across this? And if so, can it be combined with the OMS dietary recommendations?
Yes, absolutely. It can be. There we have, so we include protein, we include fiber, and we include good fats on the Overcoming MS diet. So absolutely those recommendations. It sounds like you just need a little bit of tweaking. Maybe you've been, maybe there hasn't been enough fiber. There's been some of the white products, white rice or white bread in the diet. They just need to switch to the whole grain alternatives. Those kinds of things. Maybe there needs to be, an extra portion of white fish a week, or a few prawns going into your salad at lunchtime. But yeah, I'm sure the Zoe people will help advise around that. But 100% you can do it within the realms of the Overcoming MS diet, and it's really interesting. So good luck with it.
Great. Another way of geeking out when it comes to measuring nutrients and things. And then Anna asks, is there any food or supplement that can help regenerate myelin?
That's really interesting. So there was a study done on something called ursolic acid, which is found in rosemary and other aromatic herbs like oregano as well. And they actually found, and this is just a study that was done on mice, but they actually found that it was suggested that it may have remyelinating properties. So including fresh aromatic herbs in your cooking, or doing a rosemary infusion and drinking tea would be a nice way to get some of those benefits. The other area of interest around remyelination has been the intermittent fasting and the processes that happen during intermittent fasting. So intermittent fasting means that time-restricted eating, when you don't eat between dinner and breakfast the next morning, and you allow that window to grow beyond 12 hours, so 12 to 14, even 14, 15 hours long. And it's thought that it may allow for some remyelination, because your body is constantly, the processes are constantly there to try and remyelinate. So it's just enabling that. The only other one that springs to mind is medicinal mushrooms and the lion's mane mushroom, which has neurotrophic factors. So it increases something called BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And so that, whilst it wouldn't be remyelinating, it might be helping to grow new neural pathways for neuroplasticity, which is the same benefit that you will get if you're exercising and using high-intensity training as well.
Great, thank you.
I don't know if you guys have heard of anything else with remyelination.
No. I mean, the rosemary traditionally was it's always been used for brain power, hasn't it? I've read somewhere that scholars used to have a sprig of rosemary when they were writing or doing exams and things like that. So I think it's been traditionally known as good for the brain. So that's really interesting, the fact that yeah, great. And a pretty quick one, is shop bought popcorn compliant?
Oh, that's a really tricky one, because I love popcorn. I would say it's one of those amber foods, and it completely depends on the quality of the popcorn. Some of the sort of posher, what do they call things like popcorn?
Yeah.
I'm picturing. I would say not ideal, because yes, they've got sunflower, and chances, I think it's sunflower oil has been used, and chances are it's gone to quite a high temperature. But given the quantity that you eat, and given the fact that there's probably not much sunflower oil itself on the actual popped corn, I would say it was probably one of those amber foods. Although you can get little popcorn makers that you can use at home, and they don't use any oil. You can just pop your own, and then you can flavor them with whatever you like. I think, Karen, did I hear somebody talk about a recipe for popcorn? Was it you, Kim? Did you mention?
No, it wasn't me.
I used to have one of those air poppers, and they were brilliant.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. And then you can put such lovely, flavors and some herbs and spices on your popcorn.
Yeah, I remember somebody talking about using nutritional yeast flakes, crushing up nutritional yeast flakes, and making like a cheesy popcorn with some home popped popcorn. So yeah,
that's a really good idea. That's a good Christmas present to put on your list. Air pop. Okay. Right. So the next question is, how bad is a small amount of dairy? As I've just completed the Zoe project, which shows that dairy is okay, but it isn't good for MS. So what?
I mean, my stance is I've read the papers that all demonstrate the evidence around what dairy has the potential to do to the MS brain. And I'm adamant that a little bit of dairy is like having a little bit of attack on your myelin sheath. So if you're okay with that, then you can include dairy. But I think that given the myelin sheath is being attacked anyway, we don't need to put fuel on that fire. And I would say dairy is off the menu 100% of the time, 24/7. And if you just say, I'm just going to have a little splash in my coffee, but other than that, I'm dairy free, just that little splash of milk in your coffee is sending those signals for your immune system to attack and destroy your myelin. So no, and especially when there are so many great alternatives now, it's just not necessary.
Exactly. Okay. Next question from Mia. I would love to know, when trying to prevent family from getting MS, what are the most important elements of the diet to start with? I worry about my sister's diet, but the OMS diet would be a complete change, and I suspect too overwhelming for her.
Yeah,
So
I would just say, if somebody doesn't have MS and they want to make sure that they are living a healthful life, so they are minimizing their risk of MS, I would say focus on the whole foods, focus on increasing fresh whole foods, fresh plant foods every day. Don't rely on meat and dairy as your main source of protein in the diet. Think about and introduce and explore and experiment and enjoy beans and lentils, nuts and seeds, because this is so close to the Mediterranean diet, which is the most well-studied and healthful diet anywhere in the world. If we can move everybody towards following that kind of pattern, you know, everyone's going to benefit from it, particularly people, if we wanted to prevent them from any chronic condition or any chronic disease. So oily fish, lots of plant foods, moving away from processed foods, yeah, lots more plant proteins. Those would be my recommendations.
that's great. And a daily vitamin D supplement.
Yes, absolutely.
Making sure that, yeah, making sure that they remain high in vitamin D, I think. Okay, next question from Jennifer. Can you help me understand breads and baked foods as whole options? Also, what about fish in tins like water, packed albacore, tuna?
So the first part of the question is, can you repeat it?
Breads and baked foods as whole options. Yes.
So yeah, so with breads, maybe this person is asking about whole foods rather than the highly processed food. So supermarket bread has really come under the spotlight recently as being a highly processed food because it's got so many additives to give it that exceptionally long shelf life. If you buy a loaf of bread in a baker's or even in the bakery section of the supermarket, it's never going to last as long as the plastic wrapped Hovis or Kingsmill bread that you buy off the shelf. And those breads are packed with unhealthful oils like palm oil that we're trying to avoid. And I would say steer clear and choose your bread from the bakery section instead. Avoid wasting it. You can slice it and freeze it. There's no need to let it go off. But yeah, so just avoid. So for baked goods, similarly, anything that you're buying in a packet in the supermarket is going to be packed full of unhealthful oils that have been pumped in just to ensure a longer shelf life. So you're much better using recipes from the Overcoming MS website, of which there are loads, and even the Sensitive Foodie, looking for recipes there for home baked goods. And then the second part of the question.
Fish in tins, like tinned tuna.
Yeah. So all tinned fish is really great, cheap, accessible, quick and easy part of the Overcoming MS diet. The only thing to be aware of with tinned tuna is that if it's tinned tuna, although it's a low-fat protein and it's perfectly fine to include it on the Overcoming MS diet, it doesn't count as an oily fish. It's lost its oil in the canning process. That's not the same with the mackerel and the tinned salmon and the other fish, but that does count for the tinned tuna. So you can include it, but don't count it as one of your servings of oily fish.
Okay, Karen, over to you.
Okay, I'm hoping I'm up to date. I had a slight technical hitch.
No, you're perfect. Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, so I think I'm up to date with the questions, but so Sam, what would you consider to be the best or the healthiest alternative to cow's milk in tea and cereal and everything?
I think it's a question of taste. I am, as a menopausal woman, I am using soy milk because I like to get my soy, which is very good for us ladies in menopause. And it's also higher in protein than some of the other plant milks. But I think it's entirely up to personal preference. I tend not to use rice milk because I find it's quite sweet and it's quite thin. I like my oat milk in tea, but I find soy milk is nicer in coffee. Ladies, opinions, thoughts, recommendations for good plant-based milk?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you with the soy and and for the menopause, it really does help, and I like the unsweetened oat milk, particularly when it's nice and creamy, and you can use that in sort of if you're making creamy desserts and things like that, because it's still quite sweet. It means you don't need to add in that much sugar into it. Someone tried to persuade me recently that pea milk was the best milk in tea, and I tried it, but I'm not convinced. But I think that's more of a matter of taste. How about you, Kim?
Or almond milk is a wonderful, it's very tasty, can be quite like rich, actually, not too watery, like some of the other vegan milks can be. And then oat milk, especially if you have coffee in the morning. There's that amazing barista version, which froths up quite nicely. Yeah, so that's quite, I don't know if you know about that version. That's the oat milk barista. Oh, I'm not on mute, am I? Oh,
No.
No,
we're listening, sorry.
No. Oh, no. Okay. Yeah, so that would be my recommendations. Almond or the Oatly, such a nice brand.
Yeah. Okay. When we've lost Karen again, she's dipped out. So I don't know if you've got questions.
Got a couple of questions. Okay, let's have a look. So, shall we talk about alcohol consumption? Can we please talk a bit about alcohol consumption and if it can impact MS?
If you get drunk and then you might fall over, which is not helpful if you've got MS. So I would recommend, especially if you have balance issues, alcohol in moderation. No, joking aside, there's no studies to suggest that alcohol increases your risk of getting MS. Yes, alcohol is a toxin. So we have to think about the toxic effects on the body. But the Holism study actually demonstrated that those people that do enjoy a small glass of alcohol 3 or 4 times a week actually do better than people who are completely teetotal. And whilst I don't believe that that necessarily has anything to do with the alcohol itself, it's more about the relaxation and the lifestyle that may come with that. There is alcohol is fine within moderation. Again, sensible heads, everybody. The nutritionist did not say it's okay to go out and get blind drunk.
Cool, that's great. You're back, Karen.
Oh, I don't know what is going on with my tech tonight, but yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, you carry on.
Okay, well, I can't see any more questions because I disappeared again. So, and also I just noticed, oh no, we've still got a bit of time. So if there's
That's
more
fine.
questions, I'll go back to you.
I'll pull up a question. So, I like this question about sugar. what about sugar in any form? So is it okay? Should we rather be looking at maple syrup or honey, stevia as alternatives? So yeah, if we can talk a bit about sugar and what we should be consuming, how much.
So, well, we shouldn't really be adding sugar too much to our daily diet. Sugar has a pro-inflammatory effect on the body, which is not helpful if you have a chronic inflammatory condition like multiple sclerosis. The difference between, let's just look at sugar, honey, and maple syrup, I think you said, in terms of what is happening metabolically as you digest and absorb all three of those, it's a very similar effect. It will cause a rise in blood sugar, which will cause a rise in insulin output and a rise in the inflammatory mediators that follow that metabolic effect. So adding a spoonful of brown sugar or a spoonful of white sugar or a spoonful of honey to your porridge potentially has the same impact in that respect. However, honey and maple syrup are both more nutritional than sugar, and they can bring with them additional B vitamins, minerals like manganese in maple syrup, even some protein, I think, in honey, and some of the antibacterial effects. So they are more nutritious. So I would always choose to sweeten things at home with those kinds of things, being mindful to the fact that I'm still adding sugar. You mentioned stevia. So stevia is a natural sugar alternative, which doesn't cause a blood sugar spike. And so for that reason, it's finding its way into lots of products at the moment. I personally think it has a really revolting bitter taste and can't stomach it at all, but I think some people aren't sensitive to that taste, and it's very, very sweet as well, so you don't need to use much of it, and it doesn't affect the body in the same way. So that would be a nice substitute. The artificial sweeteners like Canderel and Sweetex and things, because they are these artificial chemicals, there is some controversy around how they may be really bad for brain tissue and our brains, and are definitely best avoided. Has that answered the question? Is there?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So yeah, sugar, inflammatory, use it as a treat.
Yeah,
right, just if you need to have a bit, just have a little bit, and rather go for a healthier option. And yeah, stevia, I agree with you, not a great taste there, really. Yeah. Okay, Karen, can I hand over to you? Are there some questions that have come through for you?
Yeah, there are. Well, just as a couple of things now related to the sugar question, and it's interesting, isn't it? And that debate comes up. One is coconut sugar okay?
Yes. Short answer, yes. So we avoid the coconut meat and the coconut milk and the coconut cream because that's the saturated fat. But coconut water and coconut sugar are both completely permissible because there is no fat in them. And coconut sugar has a much lower propensity for that blood sugar spike. So again, it provides sweetness without too much of a blood sugar spike. So yeah.
It's also slightly less refined, isn't it? The way that it's actually made, the way that it comes from the coconut palm tree in the first place. So it's also more expensive as well. But yeah, I get asked that question a lot because I tend to use that. And then the sugar and alcohol, how's that different?
Yeah, it's not
Another
different.
question.
Different. It does affect the body in the same way. And I always, it's always nice to have a glass of red wine with a meal instead of 3 vodka and tonics instead of a meal. Because when you have your alcohol together with a meal, you are reducing the impact of that pure sugar source, which is the alcohol, because you've got a well-balanced meal in front of you with good fat, protein and fiber, which will slow down the release of the sugar in the alcohol and help to kind of level out that effect. So try not drinking on an empty stomach, and enjoy your alcohol with a meal.
All very wise and sensible. Yeah, cool. I was just wondering, maybe if we can go back to, there's some other really quite interesting questions on the ones that were sent in. Kim, do you want to ask? Go back to that.
Absolutely. Okay, so shall we talk about meat? So can you please explain the issues in consuming meat as regards to MS? Does the problem lie in the fats, or is it the proteins that are the problem? And then, is wild meat okay, as wild animals don't get the opportunity to build up fat? That's a great question.
Yeah, really good question. So the evidence for the Overcoming MS program came about through the research of Professor Jelinek. And one of the areas of research was around looking at large population studies or epidemiological studies with large populations and dietary patterns in areas where there was lower levels of chronic disease, more longevity, and studies like the China study indicate that population tends to live longer and without chronic disease when there is less or no meat available. And so that's sort of one of the sort of the ideas to hold in the background around the meat. The second thing is, yes, there is a saturated fat element to meat. Particularly, you can see the visible white fat on meat. That is pure saturated fat. But even some like the white chicken breast, for example, which is very low in the saturated fat, still contains decent levels of omega-6 fat. And that omega-6 is the arachidonic acid. So that's the pro-inflammatory fat. That's the pro-inflammatory omega-6 fat. So yes, meat contains pro-inflammatory fat as well. From a general health point of view, red meat is classed as a class 2 carcinogen. Processed meat is a class 1 carcinogen. So processed meat, for example, is classed as likely to cause cancer, as is smoking, whilst red meat is classed could well cause cancer. And this is classified by the World Health Organization. So it is well recognized that meat is not a healthful substance to include, certainly on the sort of level and frequency with which we are consuming it in the Western world. There are other mechanisms, the links with cardiovascular disease, for example. Some of the bacteria that digest and break down some of the components and the proteins in meat can actually produce a substance called TMAO, which stands for trimethylamine oxide, something, which is really damaging to the vasculature, the blood vessels within the body. And people with MS are already at higher risk of cardiovascular disease. And there is evidence that people with MS are at much higher, much more likely to have weaker blood vessels. And so meat, again, it's not helpful in terms of supporting MS. There are other things, other elements called AGEs, which are advanced glycated end products, which are a type of oxidation process that happens when you cook meat, particularly dry cooking meat. And these substances, again, cause damage within the body and can promote those inflammatory pathways. So, I mean, there are, I don't know, ladies, if I missed any.
No,
I'm trying to think of
I
other
think,
ways.
yeah. It's just it creates so many inflammatory factors, all of these inflammatory cytokines that everybody seemed to hear about during COVID. You know, these processes are going on all the time, aren't they? And it's just because it creates that inflammation, it's making your body work so much harder as well. And you want all those nutrients that you're eating to help you heal, not to have to start fighting fires somewhere else. So but
yeah, and I think it's an interesting question about the you know, the wild meat, because it is much lower in saturated fat, but again, it's also that question of putting something on a pedestal. Look, I mean, if you had a piece of wild meat once a year or something, then I'm sure it wouldn't, in the course of your MS, hugely affect the trajectory. But again, do you want to put these kinds of foods up there, you know, on a pedestal, or do you just want to embrace and really enjoy and maximize and all these other lovely healthful foods that are available?
Well, and the bacteria in meat, you know, even when you've cooked it, there's still bacteria in there, and that's not the friendly kind for your gut. So you're working really hard to look after your microbiome, to help it to heal, to look after all these friendly guys. And then if you're having foods that have I love this word, putrefactive bacteria in, and then it kind of upsets all that as well. So it's gut health is you know, so important, as well as all of the inflammatory stuff and the imbalance of fats and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hope that's answered the question. That was a big one.
Yeah, definitely. Do we have time for one more question? I think we do. Should we do one more question? Okay, so this one is a lovely one. So so talking about women who are perimenopausal and menopausal women, how do we make sure that we get enough calcium without dairy products? So how would you suggest for compensating for them in the diet, and what other tips on diet can you give us about menopause?
Okay, well, again, the Mediterranean diet is one of the most supportive for menopause, and the Overcoming MS program, being a modified Mediterranean approach, again, is directly supportive with the number of, you know, plant-based foods and high fiber foods. The calcium, so we touched on calcium before, just being, you know, without dairy, it's just making sure you're getting lots of those nuts, tahina, almonds in particular, the dark green leafy veg, you know, loads of calcium in broccoli, and actually a whole abundance of all the other minerals and vitamins that you need to also help calcium lock into bones. But being mindful of the negative, sorry, my dog's quietly choking behind me, I hope you can't hear that. Being mindful of the other factors, the negative factors. So don't drink tea and coffee with a meal, because they bind to calcium and excrete it from the body. Leave an hour either side of a meal if you're going to drink tea and coffee. Don't drink fizzy drinks. Again, fizzy drinks contain phosphoric acid, and you can leach calcium from the bones in order to buffer that. I had another, the prunes is a good one, again, for bones. But I just thought of something else making sure that you include lots of soy. So soy is one of the sort of most biologically available proteins on a plant-based diet, aside from fish. So in the Overcoming MS program, including lots of tofu, edamame, miso, soy milk, soy yogurt. We've already mentioned, Karen, the soy milk, because soy foods can really, these are phytoestrogens. These are a source of plant-based estrogens. So these can really boost the body's own natural reserve of estrogens when your ovaries are actually declining in production. So including a good sized portion of soy foods every day in the diet is really helpful. Ground flaxseed, so flaxseed oil we're getting anyway, but ground flaxseed itself, again, is another phytoestrogenic food. So you could be mixing that into your smoothies. You could be sprinkling that into your porridge. I'm thinking, have I missed anything?
No, just the calcium set tofu. Calcium set tofu again.
Calcium set tofu, and making sure you keep up with your vitamin D supplements, because that's really key for absorbing calcium. But when we go into menopause as well, and thinking about bone health, omega-3 and good protein as well, and low saturated fat, all those things are very supportive for menopause, and for bone and heart and brain health on the other side of perimenopause, in menopause itself. So you kind of got it covered if you're already an absolute top star pupil on the Overcoming MS program. You should really be ticking all the boxes for menopause support as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sam. Okay, so we've come to the end of this. And I just want to say a big thanks to Sam for today's session. I think it's been amazing and so helpful. Thank you for your wonderful knowledge that you've shared with us, Sam. And we hope that you all enjoyed the session. And just as a reminder, you will receive a link to the recording via Zoom next week. And I also want to say thank you so much to Karen for co-hosting with me. It's just been such a pleasure also just to benefit from your wonderful knowledge. And then a big thanks to our technical team, Sean and Jake, who have been behind the scenes. No one else has known that they've been there, and they are from the staff team, and they've organized this whole thing, and they've been supporting us from the background. We will be back next month on the 5th of December, where Brett Drummond from MS Translate will be joining us to share his observations from the latest MS research presented at the ECTRIMS conference, and he will also be joined by Alex Holden, CEO for Overcoming MS. And you can actually register for this right now on the OMS website, Overcoming MS website. Also, please don't forget that if you have the time, we really appreciate your feedback in the survey as you exit the webinar. So yes, that is all from us tonight. And thank you so much for joining us. And we hope you have a lovely rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, ladies.
Yeah, thank you. You did a great job.
Oh, thank you. So did you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.